everybody, my name is Evan Bruce. Welcome back to the channel. The NASCAR Cup Series Clash at Bowman Gray Stadium is this weekend, which means we are now 2 weeks away from the NASCAR season getting officially started in Daytona. We're going to talk about some of the new rule changes that have come into the NASCAR Series across all three divisions, as well as my expectations for all three, give my predictions, and let's just hop into it. All right, so first things first, we are going to talk about some of the new rule changes that are coming in and some of the rules that are staying the same. NASCAR has announced that the playoff system will remain the same for 2025, but they are potentially looking forward to changing it for 2026. So we're still going to be stuck with the same playoff elimination format with no changes for this season, but hopefully, fingers crossed, we get some changes for next season. But staying on the topic of the playoffs, NASCAR has implemented a new rule where if you fail to start a race or miss a race for a non-medical reason, you will lose any playoff points earned and any playoff points you potentially could earn. And if you make the playoffs, you will start the playoffs with 0 playoff points. So an example would be like last year with Kyle Larson failing to make the Coca-Cola 600 due to weather implications during the Indy 500 and the Coke 600. He would eventually lose all his playoff points. So any points he earned before he missed that race and any points he would earn after the fact, he wouldn't get to keep them, and he would start the playoffs with a big goose egg. So that is a big rule change that NASCAR has implemented for all racing series. And another major sort of news, no more DVP clock in a way. There will still be a clock for the amount of time you have on pit road to make repairs, but teams can now go into the garage to repair crash damage and not be eliminated from the race. They'll still be able to make repairs and be able to go back out on track, make laps, and earn points. Whereas before, you had 7 minutes on pit road to fix any crash damage. If you couldn't fix it within those 7 minutes, you were done from the race. You pack up, you go home, and you get last place points, essentially. Or if you were involved in a wreck and you couldn't drive back, regardless if it was minor crash damage, but you have flat tires, because the next-gen tires suck, and you couldn't drive back to the pits, and you need to get towed or assistance, you would be out from the race by there. Now that is gone. If you get towed back into the garage, you can make repairs to your car and be able to jump back into the race. So that is really big, really important, especially for a lot of these teams that they may not have had severe damage, but they had enough that they could still run, but they couldn't fix it in the 7 minutes, and they were just told, hey, your car may still be able to run, but you unfortunately can't continue in the race. So glad NASCAR made that change, and that is one of the better things they've done. Another thing that they've done in as well is implement a provisional starting spot. We're getting to see it. We're going to get to see it firsthand in a couple of weeks at the Daytona 500, where if a driver outside of NASCAR meets specific qualifications, like let's say Formula One champion, Formula One winner, IndyCar champion, or something, and if they want to try and attempt to start a cup race, if they do not make it on speed out of an open car, they will get a provisional, meaning that they will be guaranteed a starting spot, which will expand the field by an extra car. Now, here's where things get interesting. If there were more than one driver, let's say there was an IndyCar driver, a sports endurance racer, and a Formula One driver all wanting to do a race at COTA, who would get the provisional? Would NASCAR grant a provisional for all three, or will it just be one with the highest acclaim? That's the big question with that, but we will be able to get to see it in 2 weeks' time at the Daytona 500, with Elio Castroneves. If he fails to make the race on speed or fails to race his way in the duels, he will be added in as an extra driver, as he'll be fielding the 91 for Trackhouse. So that is really kind of a really big thing that NASCAR is doing, and it's really going to be interesting to see how it plays out going forward. All right, so next thing that we're going to talk about is my predictions for all three series, and the first things first, I'm going to knock off the Crown Jewel races for the Cup Series. In my opinion, the Crown Jewel races are the Daytona 500, the Southern 500, the Coca-Cola 600, and the Brickyard 400. Obviously, Daytona 500, everybody wants to win it. It's the Super Bowl, start of the season, Super Bowl for NASCAR, start of the season, big race. Then you've got the Southern 500, throwback weekend at Darlington, one of NASCAR's most iconic tracks, and the Lady Too Tough to Tame, and you get the Darlington Stripe. The Coca-Cola 600, the longest race in the NASCAR Cup Series schedule. It is also one of the big races during Memorial Day, along with the Monaco Grand Prix and the Indianapolis 500. And then, in my opinion, the Brickyard 400. It's one of the Indianapolis racetrack is kind of up there amongst iconic tracks. You know, Daytona, Indianapolis, Monaco, Spa, Silverstone. Those are like the iconic tracks that you think of when you think of racetracks. You can throw in Nürburgring, you can throw in Monza into that list. But IndyCar is the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is one of the few tracks that has had multiple big racing series race there. You've had Formula One race there for a few years. You have IndyCar racing there on the road course, and during the Indianapolis 500, you have NASCAR that races there. IMSA WeatherTech just did a race there, and I think it was like a 6-hour race on Indianapolis. So you've had a lot of major racing series use Indianapolis Motor Speedway as a venue. And to me, the Brickyard 400 is one of the crown jewels, in my opinion, as it's kind of one of the races that everybody would like to win because of the namesake. So my predictions, Daytona 500 race winner, I have a feeling it's going to be Ross Chastain. You know, he was strong last year in the 500. He had a chance to win it before ultimately spinning out on the final lap along with Austin Cindric and Corey LaJoie. I think he's going to get redemption this year. I think he will win the Daytona 500. On to the Southern 500, and my pick for the Southern 500 win is Chris Buescher from Prosper, Texas, population of 30,000. Chris Buescher, he had the opportunity to win it last year. Ultimately, he had a run-in with Tyler Reddick, which handed the win over to his team owner, Brad Keselowski. But I think Chris Buescher is going to have a bit of a redemption year. You know, he had the strong win and battle against SVG at Watkins Glen. I think he's going to break through, really have a breakthrough year and win the Southern 500 along with multiple more. But I think he's going to be one of those drivers that will win the crown jewel this year. Coca-Cola 600, it's a tough one. You could say Christopher Bell going back-to-back, but for me, my pick is going to be Kyle Larson. And I think Kyle Larson, if there's no weather that happens, he's attempting the double this year. I think he's going to run strong in the Indy 500, in the IndyCar, and I think he's going to come to Charlotte with a big sort of urge, more than usual, and I think he's going to come with resilience, and I think he's going to have that motivation and confidence to get the job done and complete both races, which is 1,100 miles, and he'll win the Coca-Cola 600, and I think he's going to get a top 5, top 10 in the Indy 500. He ran well last year. The car that Allgaier ended up driving in the Coke 600 had speed. If they bring that back, I think Kyle Larson could be a threat, and I think he's going to win the Coca-Cola 600. Now on to the Brickyard for the Brickyard 400, and I think the Brickyard winner is going to be Ryan Blaney. I think Blaney is going to have a bit of redemption from last year. You know, he felt like he should have won that race after the restart where Keselowski ran out of gas. Larson went up to the front and essentially jumped to the start, according to Blaney. But I think Blaney is going to come in. He's going to have a really strong year. May not be a championship year, but I think it's going to be a stronger year than normal, and I think he's going to cap it off with the Brickyard 400. Keeping it on par with the Cup Series, I think it is now time, and it's appropriate, to do the Cup Series expectations. I think this season has got a lot to ride on after the 2024 season. We had multiple photo finishes across all three series, really, but key moments with the 3-wide finish at Atlanta and the closest finish ever in NASCAR history at Kansas between Larson and Buescher. I think 2025 has got a lot to ride on from last year, and I think NASCAR is going to do just well. This is the first year of a brand new 7-year TV deal that will feature not 2, but 4 broadcasting networks for the Cup Series. You will see the first 14 races being shown on Fox, then the next 7 races being split between TNT and Amazon Prime, and then the last half of the season being shown on NBC and USA. So I think this is going to be a really big testament to NASCAR to see how well this TV deal does. And I'm ultimately excited to see how it progresses. I think you're going to see, some fans not be too happy that there's multiple racing channels, multiple channels to watch races, especially with Amazon Prime. And Amazon Prime hosting the Coca-Cola 600 this year, so that'll be the first time the longest race and arguably the biggest race in NASCAR being shown on a streaming service. But I think it's going to do dividends. I think a lot of NASCAR fans are going to be committed to watching those races. I know I will be. And I think you're going to have a lot of the older fans that grew up watching races on Fox, ESPN, TNT, ABC, and NBC. When I grew up watching NASCAR, I remember, you had the Daytona 500 on Fox. Then you had the first, 11 races on Fox. Then it split to TNT, ABC, and ESPN. And it had the same crew. And then it went on to NBC for a little bit. And so, to me, having that sort of normalcy and having different network crews come in to do races, I think it's a little bit refreshing, so we're not dealing with the same voices for 90% of the season. It's still going to be most of the season. You're going to have the Fox crew for 14 races and then the NBC crew for another 14 races, but you will get that bit of a break between the two and have a bit of a refreshing crew with Adam Alexander, Steve Letarte, and Dale Jr. doing the broadcasts for TNT and Amazon Prime. So I think that's going to be really good on NASCAR's part for the TV deal. You also have the CW network doing the Xfinity races, and then Fox and Fox Sports 1 doing all the truck races. So that's really big for those three. But going back to the focus on Cup, you're going to have a lot of drivers. I think the top 3 drivers this year is going to be Tyler Reddick, Christopher Bell, and Kyle Larson. I think those are going to be the top 3 again this year. They were the top 3 last year. That'll continue. I expect Denny Hamlin to kind of have a down year. Both Mavis and FedEx have left Denny Hamlin, and that means a majority of races Denny Hamlin does not have a sponsor secured. We do know Sports Clips has stayed with the 11 team, as they've also stayed with Joe Gibbs in general, and Interstate Batteries will be on the car at least for a couple of races, but that still leaves about 20 races out of the 36 unsponsored for Denny Hamlin. So I think this could be the final year for Denny Hamlin in Joe Gibbs. I think I expect an announcement probably early on in the season, maybe halfway through, that Denny Hamlin will either retire or leave Joe Gibbs to join his team that he owns in 23XI and make that a 4-car operation. Trackhouse has signed arguably the biggest name in NASCAR in recent memory with Shane Van Gisbergen. He'll be going full-time in the 88, and he's brought Red Bull back into NASCAR. Red Bull is back after at least 12 years, 11, 12 years. So it's good to see Red Bull back on the car. They will be on the 88 for a handful of races. They will also be on the 87 for Connor Zilisch at Circuit of the Americas, also a part of Trackhouse. Connor Zilic is full-time in Xfinity this year for Junior Motorsports, but we'll touch on that later. But Shane Van Gisbergen, I expect him to at least get one road course win, and I think it's either going to be Circuit of the Americas, Chicago, or Watkins Glen. He ran really well at all three of those races. Chicago, he ran well up until he kind of got clipped by Chase Briscoe, and his race ended up early, and then transmission issues at COTA kind of sidelined him during that race. But he ran really well at Watkins Glen, almost got the win over Chris Buescher, so I expect to see him get at least one win this year, and I think Trackhouse in general is going to kind of have a resurgence. You know, you saw Daniel Suarez win a race last year. Ross Chastain won a race. Unfortunately, Chastain was not in the playoffs last year. I think you'll see a resurgence out of all three, especially for the team, and I expect all three drivers to make the playoffs. Hendrick Motorsports, I think, is going to have a bit of a down year. I think William Byron kind of peaked last year, and I think he's kind of remained the same, probably regress a little bit. Alex Bowman, I think, is going to have kind of carry that momentum from last season and kind of go up. Chase Elliott, I kind of expect to stay the same, as much as it pains me to say that. But I think overall Hendrick isn't going to be as dominant. I think Kyle Larson is still going to be the main guy at Hendrick and kind of be like the head honcho and the top driver in the Cup Series. But overall, I think Hendrick's performance is going to slow down a little bit, as they're one of the teams that'll really be affected with the news about Chevrolet, whether or not they do a new car or drop out of NASCAR entirely and go to Honda or Cadillac. And I think Hendrick is going to really struggle a little bit. I think RCR is going to regress a little bit. I think Austin Dillon is going to be way worse this year than he was last year. And I think Kyle Busch is slowly going to be on his way out. I wouldn't be surprised if this year he makes an announcement to call it quits, or pulls a Martin Truex and says, I'm going to do one more season. Because that was a big thing with Martin Truex. Speaking of Martin Truex and Joe Gibbs, I expect Chase Briscoe to be up front a lot more than he was at Stewart-Haas, as they have now shut down their operations. And I expect Chase Briscoe to at least get 1 to 2 wins this year in the number 19 for Joe Gibbs. Now, hopping over to the now defunct Stewart-Haas new Haas factory team, Cole Custer is back in the Cup Series, and I think Cole Custer is going to be a midfield driver again. He was a rookie candidate in 2020, got a win at Kansas during the COVID year. Was it Kansas or was it Kentucky? I think it was Kentucky. It might have been Kansas. I don't know. Can't remember. But I expect him to be a midfield driver again. Stewart-Haas in the last couple of years were really being carried by Kevin Harvick. And overall, they were just kind of a mid-tier team, which kind of sucks, as they were one of the top teams for a while. And I think Haas is going to kind of have those growing pains of trying to become a new top team. And I expect them to be kind of midfield, battling along with Spire Motorsports. I think Spire Motorsports is going to be a lot stronger this year as they were last year, but still expect them to be midfield. I expect Michael McDowell to be close to the playoffs. I expect Carson Hocevar to be close to making playoffs. But other than that, I just don't see anything big happening out of Spire. The one team I am looking forward to seeing progress really well is Front Row Motorsports. Last year, they announced a technical alliance with Team Penske, which means Penske now has Wood Brothers and Front Row Motorsports under their thumb and under their control. So I think Front Row Motorsports is going to progress and be a lot faster this year. Their driver lineup consists of Noah Gragson, Todd Gilliland, and Zane Smith. Noah Gragson in the 4 car for Front Row Motorsports. Todd Gilliland's taking over the 34, and then Zane Smith in the 38. So that's their driver lineup. I expect Todd Gilliland to really improve from last year. He showed a lot of speed last year, especially on the super speedways, and even on the mile and a half. He showed a lot of speed. So I expect them to do really well. I expect Gragson to kind of have a resurgence in his career. He kind of had that resurgence with Stuart Haas, and I think that momentum is going to carry over this season with Front Row Motorsports. Zane Smith, I expect to be back up to the top as he's returning back to Front Row Motorsports. Last time he ran with Front Row on a part-time basis in the 38, and then, of course, winning the Truck Series Championship for Front Row. So I think he'll kind of feel more at home. He'll feel more comfortable, and I expect Zane Smith to kind of have a resurgence this year. Moving on to the Xfinity Series, there's been a lot of shakeup and driver moves during the offseason for the Xfinity Series. Haas factory team is still keeping 2 Xfinity cars. They were previously Stuart Haas, but this time it'll be fielded the 00 and the 41. The 00 will be driven by Sheldon Creed. He'll be bringing over his sponsor that he had from Joe Gibbs. And then the 41 will be driven by Sam Mayer. So Sam Mayer jumped ship from Junior Motorsports to Haas factory team in the 41. I expect Sam Mayer to get a couple more wins in the Xfinity Series. He won a couple races with Junior Motorsports, beat Ryan Sieg in a photo finish at Texas last year, and I expect him to kind of continue that. But I expect Sheldon Creed to get a few more second-place finishes and possibly get a win this year. It's really hard to say with Sheldon Creed if he'll get a win in the Xfinity Series. He is a former truck champion, but it's really competitive. The Xfinity field is competitive as hell. So I do think Sheldon Creed will get a win. Junior Motorsports has kind of seen a little bit of movement. Sammy Smith, Justin Allgaier will be back with the team, but Carson Kvapil will be the new driver in the number 9, and Connor Zilich will be the new driver in the 88. Which means there is no number 1 car for Junior Motorsports. Their driver lineup will be the 7 of Justin Allgaier, the 8 of Sammy Smith, featuring the Dale Jr. font, and then the 9 of Carson Kvapil, and then the, it's not the 9, it's the 1. Carson Kvapil's in the 1 car. The 9 is the all-star driver, as we've seen Ross Chastain and Shane Van Gisbergen already announced to drive the number 9. I feel dumb on that one. And then, obviously, Connor Zilich will be in the 88 for Junior Motorsports under contract from Trackhouse. Parker Retzlaff will no longer be a part of Jordan Anderson Racing in the 31. He will go over to the 4 for Alpha Prime Racing, and I expect to see Parker Retzlaff carry a little bit more momentum going into Alpha Prime. I spoke with him back in March of last year during the Vegas race when he was on Jordan Anderson Racing, and he had a lot of expectations for last season. Hoped to get into the playoffs, and he just barely missed the playoffs, actually. So I expect Parker Retzlaff to carry a lot of momentum going into this season, as he was kind of dealt a little shady by Jordan Anderson Racing. Matt DiBenedetto will return with Viking Motorsports, this time in the number 99 this year. Matt DiBenedetto had a couple of strong runs last year in the 38 for Viking. Ryan Sieg, I don't know. Who knows what it was last year, but he had a couple of good runs. And speaking of Ryan Sieg Racing, I fully expect Ryan Sieg to break through and get his first career win this year. He had a lot of good runs. Most notable being that photo finish at Texas against Sam Mayer, and then the Vegas playoff race, finishing second to AJ Allmendinger, who won his way into the round of 8. So I expect to see Ryan Sieg get his first win. Hopefully it's in Vegas in March when I go to that race. That would be a really popular win, in my opinion. But I expect Ryan Sieg to at least get 1, maybe 2 wins this year. On top of some driver changes, Kaulig Racing has changed their lineup as they've brought in Christian Eckes from the Truck Series to run in the Xfinity Series. Daniel Dye also goes full-time for Kaulig Racing in the Xfinity Series, this time driving the 10. So we'll remain in the 10 car, as that was the sort of all-star car last year. But it will be full-time this year with Daniel Dye behind the wheel. And then Josh Williams remains in the number 11 car. I expect Josh Williams to have a little bit of a better year this year, carry that momentum that they had towards the end of the year. And I expect Josh Williams to be a playoff threat. Not so much a race-winning threat, but I expect him to be a playoff contender, a playoff threat for that final playoff spot. Joe Gibbs Racing has had a field day. William Swalowich and Taylor Gray will go full-time Xfinity Racing for Joe Gibbs Racing, with William Swalowich being in the 18 and Taylor Gray being in the 54. But Brandon Jones returns to Joe Gibbs Racing, this time racing in the number 20. So the 20 will be featuring the Menards Yellow. And then the number 19 will be the All-Star car this year, as Chase Briscoe has been announced to run a couple races with that, as well as Justin, I don't even know how to pronounce his last name. I feel bad. But Justin is going to be racing a few races in the 19 as well. Plus, we'll possibly have the possibility of Eric Almirola, John Hunter Nemechek, and Ty Gibbs running races in the 19. Possibly Denny Hamlin, and then possibly Christopher Bell as well. So the 19 will be the All-Star car this year, as the last couple of years it was the 54 car, or the 20. And then another notable driver in the Xfinity Series this year is Harrison Burton. He got the Wood Brothers 100th win last year with his win at Daytona to secure his spot in the playoffs. He has gone down to the 25 for AM Racing. So kind of a downgrade, but AM Racing going from the 15 to the 25, and Harrison Burton being the driver for that car full-time next year. Speaking of Jordan Anderson Racing, we obviously know Parker Retzlaff is not returning to the 31 car. Jeb Burton will be remaining in the 27 for Jordan Anderson Racing, but Blaine Perkins gets the call to go from the 02 for Our Motorsports to the 31 for Jordan Anderson Racing. We also will see Andy Green make a couple of races in the 32 car. We'll also see Jordan Anderson attempt the Daytona race this year, as well as some of the other super speedways. But that 32 car will be a part-time entry, but the 31 and 27 will remain that, with Blaine Perkins in the 31. And then another driver going full-time Xfinity Racing this year is obviously Anthony Alfredo. He will be driving the 42 car for Young Motorsports. And then another really key driver change, the 48 for Big Machine Racing. Last year, it was driven by Parker Kligerman. Obviously, he's announced his retirement from full-time competition. He'll find a couple of part-time gigs here and there, most notably the 75 truck for Henderson's Motorsports. But the 48 will be driven by Nick Sanchez, who moves from the 2 machine in the truck series that was Rev Racing / Spire Motorsports, and he'll be in the 48 full-time in Xfinity Series. I expect Nick Sanchez to be a playoff contender. Not so much a winner, but I expect him to be kind of top 10, top 15 every race, and a playoff contender. And then the last series to talk about, obviously, of course, is the Craftsman Truck Series. Now, there's been a few driver team changes. Rev Racing is no longer being partnered with Spire Motorsports. Spire decided to pull out of their partnership with Rev Racing. So Rev Racing, for the time being, doesn't seem to be in the Truck Series, as the 2 will be a part of Rayum Brothers. Spire, keeping on the topic of Spire, they've announced that Justin Haley and Michael McDowell will be running 2 trucks in the Daytona race. The 7 will be driven by Justin Haley, and the 07 will be driven by Michael McDowell. Their driver lineup will remain the same, with Rajat Caruth being in the 71 and the 77 remaining as Chase Purdy. I lied. Chase Purdy is not being full-time in the 7. It is Andres Perez de Lara, who will be full-time in the 77 for Spire Motorsports in the Truck Series. One of the key additions is McAnally Hilgeman Racing. They have seen the addition of Connor Mozak going full-time in the 81 truck. Tyler Ankrum will remain in the 18, but the 19 will feature the Xfinity Series champion of Daniel Hemric. Very interesting to see that. Daniel Hemric ran part-time in the Cup Series ran full-time in the Cup Series last year. His ride got taken over by Ty Dillon, and the car went from 31 to 10. So Ty Dillon's in the Cup Series. Daniel Hemric removed from that ride and dropped down all the way to the Truck Series. So I expect a little bit of a career resurgence for Daniel Hemric. I expect him to be contending for wins. But Tricon is where things get really interesting. Corey Heim will remain in the 11 for yet another year in the Truck Series. The number 5, which was driven by Dean Thompson last year, as Dean Thompson moves over full-time in Xfinity, that 5 truck will now be driven by Tony Breidinger, with partnership from Raising Cane's. So I expect to see Tony Breidinger do some really good things in that truck. She ran part-time last year in the number 1. The number 15 will remain as Tanner Gray, and the 17 will be Gio Ruggio. He'll be full-time in that truck. And then the 1 truck will be the All-Star truck with a rotating list of drivers. Last year we saw Christopher Bell, Bubba Wallace, Butterbean race in the 1. We've also saw Jack Hawksworth, an IMSA WeatherTech racer for Lexus, drive in that 1 truck as well at some of the road courses. But that will remain the All-Star truck for Tricon. ThorSport will remain the same. They'll have the 13 of Jake Garcia, the 88 of Matt Crafton, the 99 of Ben Rhodes, and the 98 of Ty Majeski. That will remain the same. Another driver that will be going full-time racing in the Truck Series is Malcolm from Malcolm in the Middle. Yes, Frankie Muniz will be full-time for Rayum Brothers in the number 33 entry in the Truck Series. So it'll be really fun to see Frankie Muniz be full-time in the Truck Series. He was full-time in ARCA competition last year, and at one point he was, I think, 2nd in ARCA points. So really good to see Frankie do well and continue his racing career, albeit it's a little bit late for him, but I'm excited for him. I'm excited to see what Frankie does in the Truck Series next year, especially for a team like Rayum Brothers. They have longevity in the sport, so I'm really excited to see how he does. Front Row Motorsports, again, staying a little bit busy between the fucking lawsuit with NASCAR with 2311, the drivers changes that they had in the Cup Series, bringing it back, Zane Smith, and then bringing in Noah Gragson for their Cup program. Their truck program got a little interesting. Lane Riggs will return to Front Row Motorsports this year, but driving the 34 as the 38 will be driven by Chandler Smith. So Chandler Smith, he went full-time Xfinity racing with Joe Gibbs last year, drops back down to the Truck Series, and will race full-time for Front Row Motorsports. So really awesome to see Chandler Smith still have a ride. I know a big thing last year was he didn't have a ride lined up, and he had talent, but he just didn't have as much of the money aspect as some of these other guys. So great to see him have an opportunity with Front Row, and Bob Jenkins giving him that opportunity. And I expect Front Row Motorsports to be a big contender in both Cup and Truck Series. You saw Lane Riggs get a couple wins towards the end of the season last year with Bristol and the Milwaukee Mile. I expect Chandler Smith to get a few wins this year, and I really expect those two to be up there on top. And I think it's going to be Lane Riggs, Ty Majeski, Corey Heim, and Chandler Smith being the top teams and the top drivers in the Truck Series next year. So I think that'll be a really interesting battle to look forward to. Other than that, there's really not a lot of notable changes amongst the driver roster. Obviously, time will tell, as there's a lot of part-time drivers that shuffle through a lot of the rides. But those are your big teams. We'll wait to see what the lineup will consist of going into Daytona in 2 weeks' time. All right, now it's time for the fun to begin, which means playoff predictions. I'm going to go over my playoff predictions for the top 16 in Cup, the 12 in Xfinity, and the 10. It's now the 10 in trucks. Starting off with the Truck Series. Obviously, I expect both Front Row Motorsports cars to be in the playoffs. I expect Ben Rhodes and Ty Majeski to be in the playoffs. I expect Grant Enfinger to be in the playoffs. I also expect Tanner Gray and Corey Heim to be in the playoffs. Obviously, Corey Heim, I expect to win the regular season title and be the #1 seed. And I think Corey Heim will be the champion at the end of the year. Killing two birds with one stone here. Giving my championship playoff prediction, championship 4, and championship prediction. I think Corey Heim will finally get it done and win the Truck Series championship. Another driver I expect to make the playoffs, Tony Breidinger. So we'll have 3 Tricon trucks in the playoffs. Obviously, I expect Tyler Ankrum to be in the playoffs, being that 9th truck. And the 10th one, it's gonna be interesting, but I think it's going to be Daniel Hemrick. I think Daniel Hemrick will fill out that Truck Series playoffs, being that 10th and final driver. On to the Championship 4. Obviously, Corey Heim is going to be in the Championship 4 again this year. But on top of that, I expect Lane Riggs to make it into the Championship 4. You know, the tracks coming towards the end of the season really fit his driving style. He's won on a couple of tracks. He played playoff spoiler twice last year with winning at the Milwaukee Mile and at Bristol. So I think Lane Riggs is going to be a threat to be in that Championship 4. I expect Ty Majeski to go back into the Championship 4. To have a shot to redeem his title. And then the final one, Tyler Ankrum. I think Tyler Ankrum's got it in him to be that 4th and final Championship 4 driver. Obviously, I don't think he's going to do it. I think it's going to be Corey Heim, as we've stated before. But I think that'll be your Championship 4 for the Truck Series as they head into Phoenix. Moving on to the Xfinity side for the playoffs, I expect all 4 Junior Motorsports drivers to get in, which is Allgaier, Kvapil, Smith, and Zilich. I expect all 4 of them to make it. I expect both RCR cars to make it in Austin Hill and Jesse Love. I think Jesse Love's going to have a breakout year. I see both Haas factory team cars making it with Sam Mayer and Sheldon Creed. And then for the rest of the field, I expect Taylor Gray to make it. I see William Swalowich making that playoff field. But the final 2 is where it kind of gets a little interesting. There's a lot of really talented drivers, but I see Ryan Sieg making it. I expect him to make it. And then the final one, call me crazy, I think it's going to be Josh Williams. And if not Josh Williams, then Christian Eckes. But a colleague car will make the playoff field, whether it's Williams or Eckes. One of those 2 will make it, and it'll make it interesting. But for my Championship 4, I expect Allgaier to go in and defend his title. I see Austin Hill being in the Championship 4 this year. And then I see Sheldon Creed. He's going to have a very Daniel Hemrick season, grab another couple of second-place finishes, make his way through the playoffs, miraculously get himself into the Championship 4. And he's just going to be one of those drivers that, like, you wouldn't expect him. He's going to be really quiet, but he'll sneak up there. So I expect him to be in the Final 4. And then the final car I see being in the Championship 4, Taylor Gray. I expect to see Taylor Gray in the Championship 4, joining Creed, Hill, and Allgaier. And for my championship pick, he's going to go back-to-back Justin Allgaier in the number 7 Brandt Chevrolet. Will go back-to-back in the Xfinity Series. Finally broke through after multiple attempts. He's going to do it again, and he's going to get his 2nd Xfinity Championship. All right, and then last but certainly not least, it is time for the Cup Series predictions. And this is where things will get interesting, as there's 16 drivers that will make it into the playoffs. I expect all 400 cars to make it with Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, William Byron, and Alex Bowman. I expect Ross Chastain to make it into the playoffs this year. I expect the 88 of Shane Van Gisbergen to make the playoffs. As I said earlier, he's probably going to win at least one, maybe two of the road course races, and then he'll get better on the mile and a halves and your short tracks. And I expect both Chastain and Shane Van Gisbergen to make it. As much as I want to see Daniel Suarez make the playoffs, I think he's going to be the first one out. But I do see Tyler Reddick making the playoffs. I do see Bubba Wallace making the playoffs. For Joe Gibbs, I see Hamlin, Bell, Gibbs, and Briscoe making the playoffs this year. I think all 4 Gibbs cars will make it. Then I see Ryan Blaney make it. And I see Austin Cindric making it. But I do not see Joey Logano making it. It's not an even year. And it's Joey Logano. He only really does well in even years. We've seen it the last few times. Winning the championship 2016, missing the playoffs 2017, 2018, going in, winning the championship. He didn't win it in 2016. Made the playoffs 2016, didn't make it 2017, won the championship in 2018, spoiling the big three. Made the playoffs in 2019, but had a really down year. 2020 makes it into the playoffs. 22 wins the championship, and then 24 last year wins the championship. But I expect Joey Logano to miss the championship this year. I do see, however, Todd Gilliland making the playoffs this year. I think he's going to get at least a win. And then I see, for the last and final playoff spot, I expect Chris Buescher to be in. Those are my 16 playoff drivers. 4 Hendrick cars, 4 Gibbs cars, 2 Trackhouse, 2 Penske, and then a front row and an RFK. That's my top 16 for the playoffs. I think the championship 4 will consist of Ryan Blaney, Kyle Larson, and Christopher Bell. I think that's going to be your big 3 this year. But then filling in that 4th and final playoff spot, Ross Chastain. I see Ross Chastain having a rebound year and being that 4th and final guy. But for my championship pick, I'm going to go Christopher Bell. I think this is going to be a breakout year for Christopher Bell. He's riding a lot of momentum from last year. I expect him to do really well. And I expect him to break through and finally get that championship. He's won the Truck Series championship. He's been close to winning the Xfinity championship. Alright guys, well that is it. Those are my playoff predictions, my championship picks, and my overall expectations for the 2025 season. We'll see you guys at the Bowman Gray Clash for the Cup Series this Saturday, February 2nd, and then in 2 weeks' time for the Daytona 500, as well as the Xfinity Series race and the Truck Series race for the season opener for all 3 series. If you guys like this video, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, and click the bell icon to be notified when it will be uploaded again. We also do have Twitch and Instagram platforms, so go ahead and follow those. And as always, I will see you guys in the very next episode. Peace.